Hello everyone, today I'll start explaining the one of the most important topic in the programming. I'll tell you about the objects, and actually we will talk about objects many times in the future. Especially I have the module object-oriented programming, where actually we will talk about the structure of modern software engineering, and this is really crucial skill for modern development. And if you want to become the software developer, this is really must have understanding the objects. And I hope it will be interesting. So let's go.
All right, so let's look at the object and some definitions I prepared for you. And the first one is the official definition, is most understandable I found, as for me. And it says that object is the root class of the class hierarchy, meaning every class in Java directly or indirectly inherits from Java lang. And Java lang is actually path to object, and it means that the object is the very top actually unit in the Java. It means that everything in Java comes from object. And I loved also myself to prepare some more informal definition for you, maybe a little bit easier to understand for the first time. And it said that object is the instance of any class. And we have already touched class a little bit, and let's look at the official definition of the class. I don't remember if we had covered it already, but it's good to repeat that the class in Java is a blueprint or template for creating object. It defines the properties or fields and behaviors or methods that the created objects will have. So what does it mean? It means that the class in Java is actually template of the object, and the fields of this class, this is the variables that we put in globally. I'll show you a little bit later to refresh your memory what I'm talking about. And behaviors, it's a method that we have learned in the previous lessons that created objects, and objects, it's instances of the classes. We will look in the practice how does it look like and how to implement this, but for now I also found some diagram. Actually, it absolutely doesn't matter what you can see here. It's everything of those squares contains the names of the objects, and all the objects inherits from the object as a main parent of the Java. In all the previous lessons we used to work in the main class and mostly in the main method, but as today we learn in the objects, we have to create the objects, and to do this first we need to do is to create the class. And to create the class you have to right click on the mouse on src directory. Src it's a short for sources, and then choose the new Java class. Here just click the class and let's name it person and press enter. And now you can see that our public class person is created as another file, and in this file Java generated for us actually the class. And the main important thing is that class must have the name same to the file. So we can't just rename this, for example, to animal, because it will be underlined with red and tell us that class animal is public, should be declared in a file named animal. So the class name must be the same as the file name. And now as we created the class, we are ready to create the object or instance of this class. And to do this, we will move to the main class, and in the main method, we will write following. We will type the person, new person with the parentheses and semicolon. And here is actually our object. So this is how object definition looks like. So we are telling what kind of object we want to create. So by the person with the uppercase, we are telling that we're talking about the person class. Then we giving it name, so it can be person, it can be just wherever, but let's keep it person. Then we assigning it with the new operator, which create the person, new person. So actually this part, new person, and parentheses creates the instance of the person class. And you can remember I explained that with the strings, that the string is the reference data type and it creates the object. So it creates the reference to object. And by new person, we creating the reference and put our object deep inside the heap memory. So this is actually very simple. And this is it about object. So the main you have to know, the creation of object is such simple as the creating of any data type. So you have to specify the data type. In our case, we creating the object, so we specifying that we want a object of the person class. We giving it name and we assigning it with the new operator and the class name with the parentheses, which create us the instance of that object. You may be wondering, why do we need to create this and how to use this and why do we need this at all? And this is fair question, because in the beginning I said that the object is one of the most important thing to understand in the modern software engineering, and I want to show you how actually you can use what we have already created. So let's move to our person, and if you remember, I told in the beginning that the object is an instance of class, and the class is a template that has its fields and the functions, or in the simple words, variables and methods. So let's create some variables and methods, and let's look how they can help to describe our object and to work with. So first of all, let's create something like name, public string name, and age. And this is simple variables, but what is different that we don't have them between curly braces of some method, but we have those variables directly in our class. And that means that those variables are global, and this means that they are visible for our person class. And to use those variables, we have to create something called constructor. But before, let me explain you how the constructor works. So in our main class, when we creating the person object, after assigning and telling new person, by those two parentheses we are calling constructor, and this constructor with the no parameters is provided by default and executed under the hood all the time when you use this construction of defining objects. So when you tell in new and person and follow it with the parentheses, our person under the hood calls something like this. And this is, you can see that it became blue, and IntelliJ tells us that it has already one usage, and if we click, it will redirect us to exactly this part, which creates this default empty constructor. Of course, you can define it to make it visible, but we are going to do something different because we want to use our global variables. As you can see, now they are not defined, so they are undefined. And to use them, we will add them to between those parentheses. So we will do string name int age. And here you can see that we already have one related problem, and our constructor expects 2 arguments but found 0. This is because we override our default constructor and not providing the empty one. So if you're not going to create constructor at all, it will use the empty constructor. If you define the constructor with parameters or without, anyway, if you want to still use the empty constructor, you have to provide it. So if we want to avoid these red things we have to create the empty constructor. And now you can see that our empty constructor is in use and our constructor with parameters are not in use. So let me just delete the empty, not to be confused. And now to create person, we need to provide to our constructor parameters as we do in the methods. So we have to provide the name and the age, but as it's the constructor, we have to tell that this name and this age must be assigned to our global variables. And to use global variables which are outside of some scopes, which are just the global scope, so it's fully belongs to the class, we have to use the keyword this. And by telling this, following with the dot, we tell in Java that we want to use the global scopes variables or global scopes functions. So we are doing this name and assigning it with a name, and the same with the age. So again, by creating the variables outside of the method body and just straight in the between the curly braces of the class, we are creating the global variables. So if you remember, in the previous lessons we used to create everything between the curly braces of the main method, but in this case, in the case of person class, we creating variables here and they are globally visible. So if you create here some variable, it will be visible for all your methods between the class. If you're gonna create the variable in the main or in some other method, it's not going to be visible for the rest of the methods and for the rest of your application. And we creating those global variables, leaving them undefined because we want our constructor to control the values of those variables. And then we creating the constructor with the accessor modifier, which is public. Then we giving it, then we using the same name of our class and parentheses. And with these 3 things, access modifier, class name, and the parentheses, we are telling that we wanna create constructor. Constructor can be just empty without parameters. We can provide some more parameters. We can make as many constructors as we want and with the different parameters, but normally constructor is used to actually build your object. And here's actually what are we doing here with providing those parameters in the between the parentheses. They are like placeholders, so we're using them to create our object and assign its global variables with the values we want to provide. So if we move now to the main class and type here, for example, John, you can see that IntelliJ tells us that now we're using the name parameter and 40. And you can see that now we created the new person which had the name and age. And now let's move to our person back and create some function. And not this. Let's create some method which will return the string and name it introduce. At might we don't use in here the static because with the objects we actually mostly don't need it. And here let's just print some statement which will be hello. My name is name. And age is age. Yeah, actually, as I'm using the string, let me just return. Let me just create string, introduce, and I'm simply going to copy this. And here we go. This is our introduce function or method. It's actually the same. And how we can use the method from our person in our main class. We can do this using the accessing it by name of our object, and our object name is a person, and then dot. And here you can see that we are able to use age, name, and the introduce, and we want to introduce. So let's just introduce. Yes, and let's print it. And now let's run our main. And as you can see, our object we created execute some action. So it can introduce itself. By introduce, it telling us that his name is John, which we provided in the constructor, and telling us about its age, which we also used to provide in the constructor. And I think it's enough for today's lesson. What's important that you already know how to create object, and that object is the actually instance of class, and we can create just whatever we want, provide any parameters we want, any attributes, and any functions. And this object can perform some action, and
This is maybe not the best example, like the person and introduce itself, but don't worry, we are going to work with the objects in the next lessons, in the next model of object-oriented programming, and we will look again at the objects and how to use them properly. If you feel confused about the objects and like what's going on here, it's okay, because I think it took me enough time to get deep understanding of the object, but no worries, because we are going to discuss it many times again and again. And this is actually very basic information I showed you about the objects. And what can I recommend for now is to maybe read some more topics about the objects, about the theory, and practice what I have already showed you today at this lesson. And if you have any questions, drop me a message. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.